Hi, and welcome to Live with OAIB, a conversation where we discuss critical HR challenges that leaders are facing today. We use our 40 years of experience in HR, consulting, and executive coaching to go deep on topics that are top of mind but often avoided. Thanks for joining us today. OAIB is approved by SHRM to offer professional development credits, or PDCs, for the SHRM certification program for SHRM CP and the SHRM SCP. Attendees must view the presentation in its entirety to receive the SHRM activity code. You can claim this program for other kinds of HR certifications as well, but you'll need to provide the details to that certifying body. We only have approval codes for SHRM certification. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm LaTonya Roberts, COO, Executive Coach, and Human Capital Strategist. I'm a true integrator who takes a holistic approach to turn your vision for the organization or yourself into solutions that create inclusive cultures where all not only feel, but know they belong and can thrive. My superpower has been the ability to help my clients clearly articulate their needs and goals and then break them down into actionable steps that don't overwhelm them. Tawana?
Good afternoon. My name is Tawana Bhagwat. I am the CEO and Principal Consultant for OAIB. I am a visionary who believes in the power and promise of equity. I help organizations become places where everyone has a deep sense of belonging. I cut through the background noise and coach individuals and groups, but especially leaders, to make a mindset shift, starting with them being their authentic selves, aligning with their purpose, and being rooted in their own personal power. I would say my superhero power is helping people become aware of their blind spots so that they can put the oxygen mask on themselves first and then make others feel safe, heard, and inspired. I am super excited about today's conversation. It's going to be a good one. We also plan to share some tools that will help you be a better leader, but also understand how to navigate those difficult conversations. So, LaTonya, what are we talking about today?
All right, so today we're talking about the power and impact of your words and navigating some potentially uncomfortable conversations. So, Anna, you wrote this a great blog called What Do You Mean I Have to Be Careful? What inspired you to write that blog?
Outside of me being in trouble most times,
Yes, outside of that.
I would say throughout my career, both Black and white people have cautioned me to be careful with
Mhm.
what I say and how I act. Usually it's come from a good place. And in this case, it was the same. But I had a white colleague wanting to give me some coaching, but his words felt like he was telling me to shrink, play
Mhm.
small, don't rock the boat. It was as if he said, "You need to pull back. You need to be more palatable. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to make white people up."
Oh wow. Okay, so that last part, you're going to make white people upset now. We may not all say that, but a lot of times we're thinking of that, right? When we hear these types of words. So, what did you say to him in that moment?
So here's the thing. I have to admit that I'm not trying to be palatable at all or assimilate, right? But I am striving to evoke change.
Mhm.
If I'm going to be me and be effective, I have to be authentic. So what I said, hold your horses. Do you realize your colonial mindset make you think it's okay to tell me how I have to be acceptable?
Mhm.
Growing up in a culture built on white supremacy taught him that I'm the one who have to change to fit in with the dominant culture. When you tell me I have to be careful, a switch goes off in my head. And I explained to him, and now I have to navigate the power and the cultural dynamics of our relationship. So I said, okay, I needed to calm down because, as you could tell, I got a little excited. Right. And I needed for him to understand that the difference between him telling me that and how
Mhm.
I experience it is about safety, right? So when a white person tells a black person to be careful, it's trying to put us in our place. And I don't have to do that for anyone.
Yeah, no, definitely understand that. And I'm sure some people that are watching, you all have been in similar situations. At the end of this, we're going to open it up to some questions. Feel free to go ahead and put some questions or comments in the chat. We'll be responding to that towards the end. All right, so Tawana, so how did he respond to that?
So he said, I have to admit that it's frustrating that I have to be careful with what I say in today's hypersensitive culture. White men have to navigate conversations too. And I actually agree with him. Not only do they have to navigate conversations, but they also have to take into consideration the time that we're living in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Tawana, you've been at this for a while, right? Over 25 years experience doing HR. Naturally, you're going to have these types of conversations all the time. A lot of us aren't in that position, especially at the beginning of our career. We haven't necessarily found our voice, and some of us never do. But what made you feel so comfortable to be able to actually have that conversation with this person?
And I must admit, you're absolutely correct. There is some practice behind this, right?
Mhm.
From a career and personal. But I also was leaning on the fact that I do have a relationship with him, but it definitely got tested in this moment.
Mhm.
But I was not going to miss an opportunity to educate. A part of me thought it would be okay.
Mhm.
I knew his comment represented the majority thinking and the dominant culture mindset. I was not going to accept coaching that encouraged me to be other than myself. And I was not going to be out of alignment with who I am. And that required me to shrink or play small to make other people feel good.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a couple things. One, dominant culture mindset. What does that really mean?
So when I refer to dominant culture, I'm speaking about white culture, right?
Mhm.
I'm speaking about white supremacy thinking, which most organizations was built on. I'm
Mhm.
speaking about there's been a way that we have defined what professional is. And it's been through the lens of the dominant majority of
Mhm.
people, which are white, and people of color have had to conform to that way of thinking, that way of dressing, that way of how you wear your hair, that way of how you talk. So it's been very much prescribed and it's been out of alignment for our culture as people of color. We have a bit of a flair, right? We have a way in which we dress, the way in which we express our inner outer, and some may have concluded that that's being unprofessional because it's outside of the guidelines of the dominant thinking.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, by professional, give me some examples. How may we wear our hair? What clothes may we wear? What do we do to assimilate?
Well, until the Crown Act, it might not have been okay for you to have those braids in your hair and
That's
be a
right.
COO,
That's right.
right? Or to be natural. I would tell you loud colors, right? And I'm dating us, right? I'm going back how the length of the dresses. I recall a time where we had to be in business attire, which was gray, blue suits. And if I speak to my women professionals, we actually bought gray and blue suits so that we could fit in with the dominant male thinking at the time of what was acceptable and professional.
Mhm. Absolutely. I remember when I first started my career, you're speaking of wearing braids. I never until recently wore braids, but in the very beginning, I've always had natural hair, but I would spend 2 hours every Sunday night straightening out long, thick, curly hair just so I could be seen as professional when I walk through the doors.
Absolutely.
Yes, my hair paid a price for that for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so freeing to be able to come in and just be who you are and still respect it. And that's not always the case, or you don't always feel that way. Even our school system still teaches you how to walk in to a room and present yourself as professional. Anyway.
Great point.
Yeah, yeah. So how have you always been able to talk so freely? Because in the time that I've known you, you always show up as this bigger than life personality, right? But it's not fake. It's who you truly are, right? So how did that come about?
So I, like most Black people, had to find my voice. And when I did, it was freeing. You said it. It was freeing. I know my history, I understand it, and I'm proud of who I am. I would also say that I came from a place of highly confident, direct, right? I was taught that. That's how I grew up, with strong Black women. But when I entered corporate America, I would tell you that my role models told me, here's how you're going to make it. We're going to support you, but you need to not make people feel uncomfortable. You need to not come across as, a bully. I even heard that word before in my career. And what I translated that to mean is assimilating. And I want to be super clear that I tried. I really did. I tried like everybody else did. Okay, let me get it together. But I was so out of alignment. And there were days where I felt powerless, inauthentic to myself on most days. But I'm like, I'm in it. I'm a professional, right? I can do this. And it was hard. And like most people, I hit a pivotal moment in my career where I was at a crossroad. I'm happy that it was early in my career, though, because I had to decide if this was the right place for me. And like most people, I said it wasn't. No, this isn't the right place. But yet I decided to stay. So my yes became a yes with conditions, right? And in those conditions, I had to decide, what did I need from me internally, because I could not allow the system to give me my value or worth. And that value or worth shows up in positions, right? It shows up in promotions and titles. It shows up with who you can be in the room with, your ability to influence. So I had to spend some time working on my inner as I found my voice and I gave myself value. Did I want to be successful? Sure. Did I seek to earn position and title and power, but not with the equal sign of, and that's what you're worth? So I had conditions. And as I started to find my voice and come up, being more authentic, right? Walking in my own authority and power, that's when I found that I was much more productive and innovative, because I wasn't trying to navigate the system as it was given to me. I understood the games of the rules of the game. I played them, but not at the point of sacrificing self anymore.
Absolutely. So, one of the things I love about the work that we do, the executive coaching side, we get a chance to really go inward. But
Yeah.
for a lot of us, that started with ourself, right? Even I'll say for me, for example, before I started coaching, I actually received coaching. And
Mm-hmm.
I worked on self for about 2 years before
Mm-hmm.
I was able to go and start working with others. I fell in love with it. That's when I started to make that pivot from working on more organizational type stuff like IT and organizational design to moving to working with the people themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What was some of the inner work that you did in order to start to make that personal transformation so that you can make a bigger impact on those that you worked with?
Where do I begin? I would say that inner work is a journey.
Uh-huh.
And at that point, I was at the 5-year mark in my career, where I literally got sick. And
Mm.
I could not figure out, use the word figure out, what was I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? I see other people and they're doing great and they're living their best life and they're getting promoted and they're not getting the feedback that I'm getting. Right? Which your work is great, but your approach, you're a rock star, but when you come in the room, you are intimidating. And I'm like, what is wrong with these people? I'm not even being myself. So Lord have mercy. So like you, I got coaching. Like you, I spent a lot of time doing some value work,
Mhm.
right? I also went back to my roots, where I come from. The role models that I looked up to were strong, positive Black women, and not because they made it in corporate, right? They were successful in their own right. I
Mhm.
looked at mothers, my mother in particular, her work ethic is out of this world. And I know that I adopted that from her. I looked at a
Mhm.
grandmother who raised 7 children on her own. So I had a foundation that I wasn't willing to deviate from too much to be palatable, if you will, in corporate
Mhm.
America. And I also began to understand what plagued us as a community, what plagued organizations. And that was actually part of my pivot too, from why I left engineering, went back and got my master's degree in organizational management, because I wanted to, and HR, because I wanted to influence change at the organization level. So every time I went for certificates and certification,
Mhm.
that also helped me work on me so that I can be a better version and also understand the people that I'm supporting.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on a lot of things, right? We go back and we look at the people who made an impact on our lives and influence us in certain ways. And for a lot of people, that's enough for them to start making the change and standing up for themselves. For me, it was that, and I was just tired.
Mhm.
I was tired of people telling me no. I was tired of being passed over for opportunities. I was tired of giving so much of my time not feeling valued or even being rewarded. And rewards come in so many different ways, right? It's not always money, it's
Right.
not always time off, right? It's exposure, it's opportunities, it's a chance to have your voice be heard. You
Mhm.
know, a lot of times you're doing the work, but the senior person gets all the shine, all the glory, and they never mention you,
Mhm.
right? And I started to say, I have these 2 kids at home who I love and adore, and they have active lives, and I try to be there as much as I can, but I'm not, and I was tired of spending time with people that I felt weren't worthy of my time,
Mhm.
right? And so, I started making that pivot, and I think the personal work is something that really brought that to life, but also the people that I was surrounded by. We go into organizations and we get sometimes we get friends. That's the bonus. You go to work to get a paycheck and to earn a living, but as an added gift, you may walk away with friendships.
Yeah.
And I started talking to the people that I worked with, and I found out, hey, it's not just me that
Yeah.
feels that way, right? You have those Me Too moments, and I think there was so much power and strength in that community of people, many of them whom I still talk to today. But then also, I found that it helped me to look up and say, you know what, you deserve more. And I found that by sharing my concerns and those little tools that I picked up along the way to slowly start to take back my power, I was helping other women.
Mhm.
Right? Like, I love coaching and I love mentoring and talking to people, but my heart was with the women because, as you know, Tawana, I had my kids early. So I was raising a family, building a career, and was always that high performer. But people didn't see. It's like the duck in the water. They see you coasting along, but they don't see how fast your feet are paddling just to keep up.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like you mentioned health issues. And I like to tell people a lot of times your body doesn't recognize, or your mind doesn't recognize when you've hit that point of burnout. And for me, that happened twice in my career. But your body knows.
Absolutely.
And you listen to your body. It's telling you the signs, the fatigue that we just say, hey, let me just get an extra hour of sleep, or let me just have one more cup of coffee and I can keep going.
Yeah.
And it's slowly breaking your body down, and you don't realize it's your body's way of saying, I need help. I need an intervention. And for some, that intervention is, I need to speak up for myself. You ever felt like you get a lump in your throat, right? And you feel like you can't say anything? That's your body's way of reacting to the environment that you're in and saying, you got to change something. Or that burnout, if you really think about the technical definition of it, it's not just simply fatigue. It's specific to you going to work, right? You're overworked, you're tired, and you're just like, I don't know what it is. In every other part of my life, I'm okay. But you know how some people, when Friday is like the best day of your life, but then Sunday night, you're like, ooh.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Monday, and you get the Monday blues. That can be a sign of you having burnout, or your body saying, I need to have a change.
Yeah.
Right? So just, y'all, I'm a health and wellness coach too. That's one of my specialties. I get really passionate about really listening to your body and the wellness side of it, but that's what we bring into our coaching. But to bring it back,
let me just add one other thing. I think as you were sharing your story, what's super important is that's all part of the value equation.
absolutely.
Right? So what would you say, not you, LaTonya, but to everyone, that defines your worth? Not because someone gave you the equation that says you got a good house, you got a significant partner, you live in the house with the white picket fence, you got the 6 figures, you got the 2-car garage, right? That's what was prescribed to us. That's what we were chasing. And most of us achieved it, but yet and still we're not fulfilled.
Absolutely.
So what is your value equation? And it will differ per person. And how you know with those triggers called health, mental, spiritual, emotional health, that you need to do some evaluation, and your body will speak to you way before your mind. We have a way of tricking our mind. Just keep going. It's get through the end of this project, get through the end of that project, right? We got some goal we're trying to accomplish, and then we start over again until the body says enough is enough. And then the mind goes, it submits because you can't move anymore. So I know we say mind over matter, but sometimes when we push that mind so hard, the body has to step up to the forefront.
That's right. It will
For
take
us, as to save us from our own selves.
Absolutely. So someone in our comments said, so true. What your mind doesn't know, the body will show.
Oh, I love that.
If you continue to ignore your needs, it will catch up with you. Self-care is so essential.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things we're always asking in our coaching sessions is, what are you doing for you?
Yeah.
I don't care if it's 5 minutes out the day, an hour out of the day. Take time for you. Right? And so going back to what you said, the value equation. So for me, it came down to one word, and that was my mantra for a year. And that word was happy. Right? It's happiness. It's, I could have all the accolades, all the certifications, and I do. Right? Multiple degrees, the great job, the house, the family, all of that. But it came down to, was I happy? And that is a hard question to really respond to, right? Because that takes you looking inside and looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly, and saying, you know what, I'm not. I'm not happy right now. So for me, it was getting back to happy and making sure that, things were okay. Absolutely. And so you mentioned earlier dominant culture, right? So when we talk about dominant culture, and just so you know, when we say dominant culture or white supremacy, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're white, right? People can adopt the white supremacist mindset because
Yeah.
of the structure that we're
Yeah.
in, right? It's how we grew up. It's the sense of urgency. There's only one way. We quality or quantity over quality,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the go 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 instead of taking time to just be.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that takes a toll on our mindset, on our body, on our relationships. For example, women, I have to speak to you for a minute, because when we think about our high performing women, and you really break this down compared to our men that are high performers, and I'm talking C level or top of the chain, the men tend to stay in relationships. They have a wife, they have a partner. But a lot of women have a hard time staying married or even getting into a relationship as they climb the ladder. And that a lot of that is because of the structure and also that need to always give instead of take a little bit for yourself. And that can start with the self-care. That starts with the, as you say, Tawana, putting your oxygen mask on first. Because at some point you just become so depleted and there is nothing left of you. And so it's really hard for you to pick up the pieces and move on. And getting back to what I was just saying, being happy and really answering that question for yourself. So I know, Tawana, we can go on and on. So to go back to what we were talking about originally, you had this epiphany 5 years into your career, and that's amazing because a lot of us don't even get that far so early, right? So you had this relationship with this gentleman, and you were able to have that courageous conversation. He was able to do some reflection and start to change a little bit of his mindset, and you had that dialogue. But we all know these last few years, let's bring it forward, these last few years have been crazy, right? So, what are some things that make a difference this time around as people start to initiate some of these conversations that were previously not held, especially in the workplace?
So there's a couple of things when you talk about my realization, I'll call
Mhm.
it, right? Doing some self evaluation, some self analysis to bring about a change in me first before I can even begin to have expectations of other people. And I must admit, my expectation was pretty low, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to be respected. Why should that be a low expectation? Because it should be a given. I
Mhm.
wanted to belong
Mhm.
to the organization. Again, something that should be given. I wanted to be treated as an equal partner, working together towards a common goal called team work, right?
Mhm.
So those were low expectations, but they should be given in most organizations. And so, because they are low expectations, or some people have just given up to say, I don't even have that as an expectation. I just come to work, do my job, and leave. That has taken a toll on many of us to have that approach because your needs don't go away because that's how you decided you're going to move in the world.
Mhm.
So I decided that that's not how I wanted to live my career out. I wanted to be one that made a difference, but show up as being authentic to self, right? And owning my own power and
Mhm.
walking in that, and not from a disrespectful or disruptive place, but from a place that will make a difference. And I was committed to educating, raising awareness. And that's why I'm so elated about the work that we do every single day, because I get to help organizations bring what should be a given back to life, right?
Mhm.
And do it in a way that is everyone benefit, not just people of color. everyone benefits from it because it's more productive, there's more collaboration. It speaks to a different type of culture that most organizations have not intentionally worked on.
Absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
would say that's what is the difference, right?
Mhm.
My commitment to seeing a shift. And I'm hopeful that it will occur and that it's going to take all of us to do it.
Absolutely. So, for those people that do not have, and this is true for many, we don't have that type of relationship where you can just come and have that candid conversation.
Mhm.
So, how can someone start to have that conversation with a colleague?
So I want to share a concept with you all that we do in our training that's called calling in, right? And we know we use that loosely when we're like, oh, I call this person out. But I want us to consider calling in. And it's really about where someone has offended you or have offensive behavior or language, and you observed it or experienced it. And then you decide that you're going to have a private conversation to educate them, right? And in educating them, you're also providing them an opportunity to improve on the behavior that you have called them in on. So you notice that I said private. You notice that I said given an opportunity to improve, because most times people who are offensive or use offensive language don't even recognize that it's offensive because it's been acceptable and no one has called them in or out for that matter on it. So let me share a couple of steps with you to help you walk through that process, and particularly for those of you who may say, that's what an extrovert would do, not what an introvert would do, because I would tell you that I use this method as well. So if we talk about the steps for calling in, the first one is intent. So let's assume, right, that this person has lack of awareness, but that they have a positive intent. So translation, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Then the next step speaks to private. So I mentioned that we want to call them into a private conversation to acknowledge their slip up or misstep in the form of bringing them aware, right? Then we want to explain, right? Explain their actions that you observed or lived or experienced so that they have an opportunity to see it from your vantage point. Then we educate, right? This educate is really about giving them information that they may not have had regarding how they may have perceived their behavior or language to be okay or acceptable. And then this last step is improve. We talked about giving the benefit of the doubt. So it's something to be said to say you called Tawana in on something that she did that was a slip up or a misstep. Then Tawana goes to that next meeting and does the same thing. Most times we quickly go, see, they didn't hear us, they didn't get it, they didn't, they don't want to change. Those could very well be the case, but if we stick with we're giving the benefit of the doubt, then they got to process it, right? They got to work through what has been normal, acceptable behavior to change to something different. And that could feel uncomfortable, or they don't even know what they need to change to and how that will live or show up in their other interactions. So I would ask you to think about calling in versus calling out.
Absolutely. So, and that's great. So, 5 easy steps where you can go in and just start to have that conversation. But what if you're on the receiving end, right? We all mess up. None of us are perfect. We're going to have slip ups. So sometimes it may get turned around on you. What are your thoughts on that?
So let's look at this next slide where we talk about if you're the one that's being called in. So the first step is you got to listen, right? You got to be open to hear what people are saying to you. So you got to let your guard down, right? You got to listen to the other person's perspective. You and if it's something that is resonating with you, you should acknowledge that there was an error made and then spend some time reflecting on your actions that occurred in that moment that will have someone to call you in. The next is to educate, right? So spend some time putting yourself in this person's shoes, right? And then asking yourself and even others. Sometimes we're like, am I really that way? Let me ask a trusted friend, right? Or peer. So you can understand how to address the situation better. It's so important to use resources to continue to learn yourself. So I think about if someone says, I use this example in our last live that we had where someone is constantly cutting someone off, right? So there's tips around allowing someone to finish their thought. Is there resources or role models that you can look up if there are terms that will help trigger in your mind how you can show up differently because you're unfamiliar with new concepts of how to go about that. And then the last is around act, right? Try to be more mindful of your words, actions, and audience. We don't know what people are thinking and how they're feeling. So I'm not asking you to be hypersensitive as much as I'm asking you to be mindful, right? Because we always want to leave people who we're interacting with empowered, right? Being authentic to who they are. But at the same time, we want to make sure that through this calling in, that your colleagues don't feel like they're going to have some retaliation, or you're going to go tell the whole team, I can't believe that Tawana called me into a private meeting and she talked to me about my behavior. And then it's okay to speak to others about the calling in and get their perspective, but not from a way of trying to prove you to be right in your behavior. Because I can only tell you how you made me feel, or said differently, the experience that I had with you, because no one can make you feel a way. The experience that I had with you. And then I can only be responsible for sharing with you how I would like for our experience to be going forward. So if called in, consider listening first, then getting education, whether that's being curious about asking questions for clarity or getting additional resources, and then reflecting on how you can act the next time you may be in a situation.
Yeah, and I would add one more to that, and that's just giving yourself grace. Right? We put so much pressure on ourselves to get it right, and for so many people, especially when you put the label of DEI on top of it, that fear of getting it wrong just caused them not to take action, and it caused so much more harm than they were trying to prevent in the first place. So absolutely give yourself grace and know that if you get called in, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you have more work to do, as we all do, right?
And Joy, we're going to make sure we get to your question as soon as we finish this some role playing we're going to do.
Absolutely. I was just getting to that. So let's do some role playing, because when we're training, right, the biggest transformation that I often see with our clients is having a safe place where they can actually utilize the tools and the new knowledge that they've gained in the training, play it out, and receive some feedback. So I'm going to go through with you, Tawana, on about 5 or so different responses that may happen when you're calling someone in, and get the reactions and then the response. So start with the first one. So someone comes, you confront someone, you're calling them in, and they say, "Hey, I did say that. I apologize for anyone I may have offended." What do you say?
Yay! Hey, yay! That's accepting responsibility, right? And you thank them for accepting the responsibility. And you say, let's work together to improve, right? Super excited. That's ideal.
That's ideal. But we all know
Mhm.
that ideal is not always reality, right? So
Right,
you pray that that's how it happens, but we come into these situations and we're nervous sometimes, and we're just like, please let them to accept this and not get offended.
right.
Right? So that's one response. But let's get into a few others. So you've called the person in and they say, I didn't know I shouldn't say that.
Well, that reaction is avoiding responsibility, right? So your response to that would be, that's okay. Here's why you shouldn't make those types of statements. And you give them the why. So you're educating, right? You're explaining, you're helping them to understand. But their response was definitely avoiding responsibility for their actions.
Mm-hmm. What about, I didn't mean it like that?
We get that one all the time, right?
All the time.
And that reaction is denial. And not because they might not have meant it that way, but the reaction of I didn't mean it that way could sometimes come across as dismissing, right, your lived experience in that moment. So your response to such a response as denying would be, even if that was not your intention, the statement could be offensive to others, right? So not just me, but others could be offended by what you said.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tawana, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah, that one sometimes raised the temperature up just a little bit, right? That's the non apology, right? Because it started out with I'm sorry, but then it's about you feel that way. So your response to that would be, it is important that you understand how your actions could impact others' feelings. In addition to an apology, I would want you to understand my perception, right? How I perceived your response, your
Mm-hmm.
language used, and in this case, how you reacted to me calling you in, because we're in a private conversation. So there's no one else around for that person to have to, be something else,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely a non apology. So keep your cool.
All right. Last one. With Tawana, Jacob makes similar jokes all the time.
Mm, mm, mm. So that's the diversion to others, right? You're like, well, what about him? Did you say something to him? Or you're only picking on me?
Mm-hmm.
That's the translation. So your response could be, we can work with him as well. But for now, let's focus on your statement and how you can improve.
That's right. Bring it around because we can only control our actions and our responses. Absolutely. All right. So those were some good tips, right? Those are just 5 simple best case scenario and some potential worst case scenarios. How do you get out of that? But that's assuming you feel okay having the conversation with the person, right?
Yeah.
But what can someone do if the person that's making the comment is their supervisor or someone that has influence over their career?
I love this one. There is, when there is hierarchy involved, right?
Mhm.
There's always concern about retaliation,
Mhm.
right? But I will also tell you that your supervisor or those that are above you are not exempt from you sharing with them how you would like to be treated. That applies in work, at home, anywhere that
Mhm.
you go. Okay. And if you don't speak up for yourself, and I love this quote that I say all the time, you train people how to treat you, then
Mhm.
they will continue. So I would say the same principle applies here. And a simple conversation could be, Hi, Tawana. I was hoping that we could talk today in our one-on-one, or if I could stop by for a quick chat.
Mm-hmm.
In the meeting today, you said, I felt that you directed that statement to me. It made me uncomfortable. And I'm hoping that we can have some dialogue around why that made me uncomfortable, with hopes that that is not something that I experience from you or anyone else in the organization going forward. That was professional.
Mm-hmm.
There was not emotion triggered in that, but it was literally stating an actual fact of how you experience. Now, I know some of you are thinking, yeah, that's how we open up the door for gaslighting. And you're absolutely correct, because the manager or supervisor can become dismissive or make you think that that never happened. And in a nutshell, you're crazy for having such an experience. I would tell you gaslighting is not okay, but they get to react however they react. But then you stay in the conversation so that you are clear in communicating how you would like to partner with them better, and giving the benefit of the doubt that they received that message. And if not, you revisit it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where allyship becomes so important, right? This is where coaching becomes so important. And I would suggest that you use this for your peers as well, if you feel you need that additional support, as well as reaching out to HR, right? As another person or organization, department that could help you navigate through those waters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You use the term gaslighting. For those that aren't familiar with that term, what does that mean?
So, gaslighting is an experience where you have brought something to someone's attention, and that they will have you to believe that they're actually the victim in the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because you brought this thing to their attention, and they are offended or appalled that you would have such a thought about how they showed up or treated you. So it's reversing the roles of having you to feel or make you feel as if you're the person who have offended or done something wrong.
Thank you for that. All right. So we started this conversation with a simple statement that is typically viewed under the lens of constructive criticism,
Yeah.
right? But it's triggering. What are some other statements that may be triggering when someone is receiving so called feedback?
Um, Triggering from the examples that we just did with the
Just
calling in.
triggering in general, some common statements made in the workplace.
Right. So I would say one that I hear about, in particularly from African American women, is that their Black women are typically angry, or people
Mhm.
will, but they won't say it that way. So they'll say, "Are you upset?" Right? I wasn't expecting this level of emotion coming from you regarding this, right? I've also heard comments of, giving administrative work to women, right? I've heard comments that could be triggering around women aren't flexible. Oh, don't ask Tawana to stay late. She has two children.
Mhm.
What does that mean that I have two children? I've heard comments from our global community around things like they have a heavy accent. So, I don't understand. I don't understand. Right. And that's a translation about their accent. So there's many things that can be triggering for people depending on how they identify. And so my thing is be in the mindset of curiosity, right? Ask questions like, well, how should I have said that? Or here's what I meant by that in my
Mhm.
explanation. Or not grouping people, because that's profiling, that because Tawana has 4 children, by the way, that I'm not flexible because I have 4 children. I was able to come to work, so I made the appropriate accommodations for my children while I'm at work. Don't assume that I don't have what I need in order to do what I need to do. So ask the question versus making an assumption, because it's forms of excluding.
Absolutely. And you know what they say about assumptions.
Yes, I do.
All right. So I'm going to go into our comments. We have a great question here. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in there. But Joy asks, how can I be supportive as an older senior white colleague or ally to younger colleagues of color who have been traumatized around being seen and heard in the workplace? I have mainly worked for people of color led organizations and don't expect to be automatically trusted. How do well meaning white folks balance our own authenticity, which includes trauma, with the sensitivity to others' trauma? Is it enough to ask to be called out for microaggressions and be supportive in a general way? Great question, Joy.
Woo! Joy, that was loaded. So we're going to have to pick this apart. So I'll start with the first part of your question. How can I be supportive as a older senior white colleague, an ally, to younger colleagues of color who have been traumatized around being seen and heard in the workplace? So Joy, one, thank you for that question. I do believe it's so important, and we need allies more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of things that I would say. The first would be one, people have to know that you're an ally, and you don't just become an ally because you say, I'm an ally, right? So you gain trust by how you show up, by how you use your privilege to give voice to the voiceless, even when you're not asked, right? So, word spreads quickly in the community. Did you hear what Joy said in that meeting? I didn't even know that she felt that way, right? And as it relates to trauma, there's so much trauma in the workplace, and it's not just for people of color, it is trauma for all to some degree. But of course, as you well know, there's more trauma as it relates to people of color. So my ask is that when there's an opportunity to address those issues, that you do. You lead the conversation. You be proactive about resolving trauma. And the first thing that I tell most leaders is you got to acknowledge that trauma happened and it exists. We tend to step over it to try to get at, let's just move things forward. And if we could just move things forward, then that'll make things better. But let's pause and acknowledge that trauma has occurred in the organization, on the team, by the hands of team members, past and present. And we're no longer going to accept that behavior. And then encouraging people to come forward. And when people start to come forward that they don't experience retaliation, it doesn't create a buzz around the organization, but you're providing them the support that they need in order to begin to heal themselves. And with the healing of individuals, the collective heals. Let's see.
We'll get to the last statement. Is it enough to be asked to be called out for microaggressions and be supportive in a general way?
I would say no. It's not enough to be called out for microaggressions. Microaggressions is at the undercurrent of every single thing that is wrong with organizations that do not value diversity, equity, and inclusion. So not only do we need to call them out / in, but you also then need to talk about corrective behavior, which starts with identifying that that was unwanted behavior and inappropriate. Talk about how you correct the behavior so that others don't experience it. And then lastly, but most importantly, is holding those accountable that have done the offense. But don't just stop with them. You also have to hold their leaders accountable, because if you don't, then it will continue in the organization. And for those of us who are experiencing microaggression or witnessing it and not speaking to it, you are still enabling the behavior to exist in the organization. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for that question, Joey.
Thank you, Joy. And I just have a couple of builds on just the first part about how do you show up. It's like Tawana said, it's more than your words, but it's also in how you're promoting people. She said being a voice for them when they're not in the room, or being a voice to the voiceless. So that looks like volunteering, or just saying if there's a especially high visibility project on your work site, just saying, hey, so and so is a great person for this, constantly showing how they're supporting the organization and adding value, especially when there's places where only you're privy to that information, because those conversations are being had, but it's not always about certain people in the organization. So that's one way you can show up, is just being an advocate and ally, and certainly letting them know that you're an ally going beyond just your words. All right, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to close out really quick, Tawana, if you can get this in 30 seconds or less. We always like to leave our audience with one action that they could take away today. What would you leave with them today? What's that one action?
Don't be afraid to lean into difficult conversations.
It
is in the difficult conversations that transformation occurs.
Great, you did it. High five through the room here. All right, so we mentioned last time that we are now giving SHRM certification. So if we can go ahead and get that code up on the screen here. OAIB is approved by SHRM to offer PDCs for the SHRM CP and SHRM SCP. The session has been pre-approved for one PDC. You can claim recertification credit with the program code 22Y4B55. It's important that you keep track of the sessions that you do, as we, OAIB, will not be able to provide you with a record of the sessions you've attended. Thank you all so much for listening in today. For more information about our services, please visit our website at oaib.org. That's oaib.org. You can also scan that QR code on the screen, and it will take you right next to our site. Leave a comment below letting us know your biggest takeaway from today, and what other topics you want to hear about us or hear from us. We'll definitely be responding to those comments. We'll be here every first and third Tuesday of the month. And remember, you now can get some SHRM credit with us so that you can continue to grow professionally and personally. And we'll see you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.